Thank you so much, Johnny, for joining me again today. So one overarching question that at least strikes me and perhaps some of our viewers is, when did the world become so interconnected? When did we develop this reliance on supply chain? Is this something that just kind of developed organically, or is it something that's been more of a phenomenon in the last 20, 30 years?
We've always had global supply chains, right? Back in the day, even colonial days when we were trading, we had supply chains. We just never thought about them in the manner that we now understand today. And so back to the days when we were bartering to now when we're trading, we have supply chains. So it's not a new phenomenon. And one key point I want to make is that the delays and interruptions that we experience today have always been there. Okay, it's just that it's become more prominent because now we're all feeling the pain of long global stretched supply chains and products and goods not being available in the quantities that we expect them to be in the normal situation.
So we've always, in some ways, had these, as you mentioned, these long supply chains, or we've had supply chains long, short. They've always been there. So that's a very wonderful way of explaining it to us. But with the supply chain disruptions, you've said that they've always been there, but with COVID, there's sort of a light has been shone on them. A greater focus has been paid. More attention has been paid. What kind of disruptions would we have seen pre-COVID that might make us remember, oh, right, I remember that. And yeah, that was a supply chain crisis issue?
There are small events that trigger shortages. For example, if a manufacturing plant experiences fire, that means that they cannot make certain things that will then be shipped. I mean, we saw the fire in Texas, and then, phone companies, not one of which is no longer, in existence. We had the volcano eruptions, with earthquakes, with natural disasters. So you can think about any event which basically stops the flow of good as a disruption. Okay, and the question becomes one of how massive is that interruption, and how quickly can we recover? Some supply chains have buffers in place. And so as consumers, we're not impacted because those buffers allow, companies in the network to actually recover. And so we don't feel the pain. COVID-19 just made everybody sort of feel the pain, which is why it's shown such a bright light on supply chains today.
No, absolutely. And I'm glad to hear that some supply chains have those buffers in place. I guess when we were experiencing all of this during COVID, I'm thinking, well, why weren't there more buffers or stronger buffers? Because it seems, for example, let's talk about British Columbia, right? They had a natural disaster, a natural event, extreme flooding, which washed out roads. And again, I mean, obviously that's a crisis situation, not common in every generation. But would there not have been buffers for that kind of situation? Why don't people pre-plan for something like that?
Well, it's hard to pre-plan for a natural event which shuts down roads and modes of transportation, right? Now, you also couple that with the Port of Vancouver, which in the supply chain terminology, that's what we call a very critical node. If you think about goods flowing to Canada on the West Coast, Port of Vancouver is the busiest, the largest. And so if everything coming into Canada through the Port of Vancouver stop, right? And stop meaning that goods cannot be moved out of the port, which means that goods cannot be moved into the port. And so you basically have a stoppage point. It's almost like you look at a pipe of water and you just broke the pipe, right? And now everything's sort of like pulling around that breakage point. So,
wow. Okay. And how competent are we to maneuver and adapt? I know we talked about these buffers, but are we flexible in Canada, both as a consumer and as a manufacturer? Are people kind of waking up and now saying, okay, we need to kind of figure out workarounds if something like this happens again with, say, flooding, with COVID, something like that?
Well, a lot of companies actually do risk planning, okay? But what I've seen, is that sometimes our risk planning just sits on the shelves, and we don't go into, practice mode. Okay, we don't practice. What happens if the catastrophe hits us? What happens if our people get all come down with illness? We don't practice that. I remember back this back when when I was in Thailand, we do earthquake drills, right? Or we
Right.
do. So we're not into that scenario, but I hope we can do more because it's good to plan, but sometimes you also need to practice the plan, right?
That's right.
In armed services, we do military drills, and that's what I think we might want to see more of in the private sector.